Hört. Festivals mit Ö1. Heute die Ars Electronica 2024.
Welcome to the Ö1 Festival podcast on the Ars Electronica 2024. The Linz Festival presents a variety of exhibitions, concerts, performances, conferences, workshops, and guided tours from September 4th to 8th under the motto, Hope, Who Will Turn the Tide? From September 5th to 7th, the 3-day symposium on the festival theme is taking place in the Post City Conference Hall. International experts are coming together here to explore new approaches that can contribute to a more sustainable and equitable future through presentations, discussions, and projects. In contrast to previous years, the focus is not only on presentations by artists and theoretical considerations, but also on the practical work of companies, projects, and initiatives. For this 7th episode of our podcast, Hannah Balber spoke to Agnes Aistleitner Kisuule, who's appearing at the festival as part of the S++ARTS Day conference. Born in Upper Austria, she's a partner and co-founder of First Circle Capital, a venture capital company that invests in African fintech startups. Agnes Aistleitner Kisuule has previously built up companies in Jordan and Ukraine. As a teenager, she won a Golden Nika at the Prix Ars Electronica in the Under-19 category in 2012. Hannah Balber met Agnes Aistleitner for an interview via video conference.
Du bist derzeit noch in Uganda. You're currently in Uganda and will soon be traveling to Linz for the conference. How do you feel about being back at the festival?
Hi Hannah, es freut mich sehr, beim Festival Podcast dabei zu sein.
Hi Hannah, I'm very happy to be part of the Festival podcast and to be back at the festival. I was also part of the Festival University 3 or 4 years ago, so I'm always very happy to be part of Ars Electronica.
Du kommst ja auch ursprünglich aus Oberösterreich. You're also originally from Upper Austria and you have quite an impressive journey behind you. Please tell me a bit about your career as an entrepreneur.
Sehr gerne.
With pleasure. I grew up in a village called Tragwein and then went to a school for artistic design in Linz. I spent a year abroad in Japan during my time at school, and then I flew to Egypt for my final project. I made a film there, and that's how I joined the Ars Electronica family. This film was called State of Revolution and was about the uprising in Egypt. Then I moved to Vienna to study law. And during my studies, I had already set up companies in the textile sector, one in Jordan, where we produced with refugee women, and then another in Ukraine. At some point, I got a bit tired of textiles and thought to myself, okay, I have to broaden my horizons now. And that's how I got into technology. First, I worked briefly for a startup in Berlin, and then I went to Uganda to set up a technology company there. I've been in Uganda for almost 5 years now. And a good 3.5 years ago, I started to invest and set up the First Circle Capital Fund together with Selma. And now I'm flying around a lot in Africa, to Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, all sorts of places where we're looking to invest. But Uganda is my home base, also because my children are half Ugandan.
Hat's dich eigentlich immer schon so in die Ferne gezogen, beziehungsweise warst du immer schon so abenteuerlustig? Have you always been so drawn to faraway places? You also mentioned it, you traveled to Egypt on your own while you were still at school to make a short documentary about the Arab Spring. How was that experience in Egypt for you?
Ja, also für mich war das immer sehr spannend. Ich wollte halt immer wissen, was irgendwo anders los ist.
I always wanted to know what was going on somewhere else and discover the world, and I found Egypt very exciting. I just wanted to see what happens in a revolution and what people's expectations are. Fast forward to today, it actually turned out quite differently to what people thought back then. But that was kind of to be expected when you looked at the bigger picture, where the country stands and what the options are.
Nur noch kurz zur Erklärung, also es geht eben hier um das Projekt State of Revolution. Just a quick explanation, this is about the State of Revolution project. It's a short film and you won the Prix Ars Electronica for it in 2012 when you were 19. How did you even come up with the idea for this project?
Es war eher mehr so, ich habe sehr viel über die Revolution gelesen und habe mich halt da sehr viel damit auseinandergesetzt vorher schon.
I had read a lot about the Arab Spring, and then I wanted to see it for myself, what was happening in Egypt. So I asked the headmaster of my school if he would give me the go-ahead, which he did, and he told me to take a camera with me. That's practically how it came about. It was only when I came back and edited it together that my professor said to me, "Why don't you submit it to Ars Electronica?" That was the day before the deadline, and so I submitted it.
Also du bist dann ja eben nach der Schule nicht Regisseurin oder Dokumentarfilmerin geworden. You didn't become a director or documentary filmmaker after school. You founded a textile factory in Jordan in 2016. How did that come about?
Ja, ich habe immer schon Interesse gehabt da im Textilbereich.
I've always had an interest in the textile sector. I also had a part-time job during my studies and organised a production in Burgenland, which taught me something about the business. That's how it came about. It was practically the exploratory phase in my life. You have to try things out somehow. I would say to all young people in their 20s, just do everything and as many different things as possible. But nobody tells you that when you're young, especially not in Austria.
Wenn du sagst, ja, so normale Erfahrungen von Leuten in ihren 20ern, ich glaube, die allerwenigsten. I believe very few people think to themselves in their early 20s while they're studying, I'm going to start a company now. That was a really big step, wasn't it?
Ja, ich glaube, wir haben in Österreich immer sehr das Denken so, oh, man muss ja dann studieren und dann muss man wo arbeiten anfangen.
I think we always have that mindset in Austria. You have to study and then you have to start working somewhere. And I think it's really important that you just try things out, even during your studies, and simply broaden your horizons and dare to try out as many different things as possible and not say you have to do this thing for the next 20 years. It's not like that. I think that's what your 20s are for, that you try out different things.
Mhm. Zu dem Unternehmen in Jordanien ist ja dann auch noch eins in der Ukraine auch dazugekommen. In addition to the company in Jordan, you founded one in Ukraine. You also studied law at the University of Vienna around this time. Did you ever have anything like a normal student life?
Nicht wirklich. Ich muss auch sagen, ich habe das Studium nicht fertig gemacht. Ich habe nur den zweiten Abschnitt fertig gemacht.
Not really. I also didn't finish my studies, I have to admit. I did summer internships at law firms and then I thought, okay, I don't think I'll ever be a lawyer. I don't really need to finish this thing. And because I like the entrepreneurial side much more, I thought I'd continue in that direction.
Was hat dich dann schließlich bewogen? What finally made you decide to leave Europe and move to Uganda?
Das war sehr random.
It was very random and it also had to do with Ars Electronica because it's such a great community. I was later part of the Ars Electronica Festival a few times. And there I was once in a program with a software developer from Uganda called Jude. He told me lots of things about Uganda and Africa in general, and I found it really exciting. And then I thought, okay, I'll just take a look and see what there is to the things he told me. And that's actually how I ended up in Uganda.
Okay, hast du es dir vorher angeschaut? Did you check it out beforehand? Or were you like, I'm moving there, I'll do it? What was the process like?
Ich war einmal da für 2 Wochen und dann habe ich geplant gehabt, dass ich gleich wiederkomme und ich habe nicht geplant gehabt, dass ich eigentlich dort bleibe.
I was there once for 2 weeks and then I planned to come back straight away. I hadn't actually planned to stay there, but it turned out that way. I flew to Uganda at the beginning of 2020, had planned to stay for 3 months, and then in March we had COVID and the airport closed. So I ended up in Uganda.
So bin ich in Uganda irgendwie stecken geblieben.
Together with her partner, Selma Ribica, Agnes Aistleitner Kisuule founded First Circle Capital, a fund for the African fintech scene. Selma Ribica has been active in the African fintech sector for 12 years, among other things as an angel investor. This is the term for someone who supports young companies with equity capital, management experience, and business contacts. First Circle Capital is a venture capital fund. This means that money from investors is put into startups and small companies with great growth potential. Agnes Aistleitner Kisuule and her team now manage $10 million for various investors and in turn invest in 13 portfolio companies from all over Africa in the fintech sector. These are companies that offer innovative, technology-based application systems in the field of finance.
In welche Bereiche oder which areas or ideas do you invest in and why?
Also wir sind so klassische Frühphaseninvestoren. Wir sind meistens so das erste institutionelle Kapital.
We are classic early-stage investors. We are usually the first institutional capital where the founders have perhaps already built something with their own money, but also with friends and family money, and we then practically help them to raise the first round. Our first check is 250,000 to 500,000. We invest in experienced teams, in very good technical teams that have already spent time in the industry. So they're usually not first-time entrepreneurs. They've mostly worked at some kind of startup or financial company and have discovered a problem there and then developed a solution and will now bring this solution to the market. And then we are their partner. Sometimes we also help to find co-founders internationally, depending on what kind of profile is needed. We also support the companies with the strategy of how they can first roll out a product and then also bring it to new markets. As venture capital investors, you assume that half of these things won't work. But sometimes you see very strong growth in one or two companies, also in our portfolio. I mean, within 2 years, they've now achieved sales of over $3 or $4 million. That's where it gets exciting, and we try to put more energy into helping them enter other markets. That's our role as an early-stage investor.
Was macht denn die Tech-Branche in Afrika? What makes the tech industry in Africa so special and exciting for you? And are there any differences between Uganda and other countries on the continent?
Also massive Unterschiede. Wir haben in Uganda sehr wenig Tech-Innovation und so, weil es ist wirklich ein kleinerer Markt.
There are massive differences. We have very little tech innovation in Uganda because it really is a small market in comparison. But we're now slowly seeing more and more exciting entrepreneurs who are building global products that are somehow aimed at a low-income segment. And that has global potential because Europe in particular doesn't necessarily look at these segments. And that's also what's exciting about African innovation. Of course, it's still early days. I mean, companies like this have been around for about 10 years and are slowly becoming more and more common. You're also seeing better quality among the founders because they're getting more experience in the field. So an ecosystem builds up over the years. I believe that local innovation has the potential to boost the economy through technology, especially in the area of credit or payments and financial management, but also in the insurance sector. And then there is also this exporting idea. Selma Rebecca has already had great experiences with this from her angel portfolios with a company from Tunisia that built a CFO automation tool and, as their local market was far too small, went to Europe and quickly got a lot of customers because they built it at low cost and offered it cheaply. That's usually the angle you come with from emerging markets, that ideally you have lower development costs and then sell them internationally. We've already seen how this has developed very well in India, and that's ultimately where the potential lies.
Where do you currently see the biggest challenges?
Afrika ist ein sehr großer Kontinent mit sehr vielen verschiedenen Ländern. Wir haben einige Länder mit großen Währungsfluktuationen.
Africa is a very large continent with many different countries. We have some countries with big currency fluctuations. We still need a lot more developers as well. We have a very thin developer population. Of course, the last 2 years have not been so easy for the continent, but things will certainly get better again. You can already see that now the first signs are there. Certain countries have already crystallized, such as Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, where more innovation is taking place. And this development will continue and will take time. So you have to be patient, I think, as a technology investor in Africa. But you can also see these outliers where something grows faster than the regular market.
Hast du persönlich jemals Angst vor dem Scheitern? Are you personally ever afraid of failure?
Also für mich gibt es das Wort Scheitern in meinem Repertoire gar nicht. Es ist immer, man lernt oder man lernt nicht.
For me, the word failure doesn't exist in my repertoire. It's always you learn or you don't learn. Failure in the Austrian context in particular is always something really bad that defines you for life. But if we reframe failure as, okay, I'm learning something for ourselves, we can take a lot more from it in life, and that takes us further.
Was denkst du da, wenn du jetzt auch zurückblickst, so die letzten 10 Jahre oder eben 12 Jahre? What do you think when you look back on the last 10 or 12 years since this whole journey began for you? What would you do differently? And where would you perhaps give your younger self clearer encouragement? Like, this path is right, this decision is right.
Es ist schwierig, jetzt im Nachhinein auch zu sagen, weil
It's difficult to say now in retrospect. I would just really say more, okay, you don't need to be so stressed. I did a lot of things and made a lot of mistakes because I thought it had to go faster. I was a bit impatient. Patience and enjoying the journey a little. I mean, you hear and read that everywhere, but you just have to realize that because you learn and it's no good if you're stressed. Most things just take time. And the important point is simply to do things regularly. Slow and steady wins the race.
Du kennst ja auch sowohl die Start-up-Seite, you know both the Start-up side and the venture capital side. What advice would you give to someone who wants to set up a company and is just starting out?
also möglichst viel Zeit mit den Kunden da zu verbringen und
To spend as much time as possible with customers and simply try things out right away. It's also important to see planning as a process. It's not, okay, I'll plan it all out and then I'll do it. Planning is small experiments where you always learn new information and then improve your decisions. One of the most important things I've learned over the last few years is just really don't stay fixed. You just have to try things out and then you realize, okay, this works better than the other one anyway, and then adjust your strategy again.
Zum Schluss das Motto des diesjährigen Ars Electronica Festivals. Lastly, the motto of this year's Ars Electronica Festival is hope. Who will turn the tide? What gives you hope at the moment?
also Hoffnung ist, wie soll ich sagen, es ist auch wieder ein Prozess.
Hope is, again, also a process. If you think there's this one thing that changes everything, then you quickly lose hope and quickly lose the strength to go forward. Most good things in life take time and are not easy. It's the same in a political process. It's always a back and forth and always a struggle. If you see it that way, then you can look to the future more positively, because there isn't this one thing that's going to change everything. It's just a process, and that gives me hope. And I also think it's important, especially in this time of hardcore polarization, that you really sit down and talk to people who have a completely different opinion without getting emotional and without being like, oh, you can't say that now, but simply seeking dialogue with people who think very differently. And I believe that it's very, very important to somehow draw hope from this, that we can talk to each other and that we simply look for the common ground rather than the difference. That's what allows us to build a better future.
Das ist das, was uns eine bessere Zukunft bauen lässt.
That was Agnes Aistleitner Kisuule in the Ö1 Festival Guide to Ars Electronica 2024. Thank you very much for listening. In the next episode, Hannah Balber talks to Michaela Mantegna from Argentina. She's a lawyer, video games enthusiast, and international expert on digital ethics, XR policy, and the intersection of AI, creativity, and copyright. At the Ars Electronica Theme Symposium, she'll be part of the Fishbowl session titled Building the Future of AI in Arts. Which infrastructures and frameworks do we need? And she will also give an interactive lecture on the topic Artificial, Legality, Ethics and Aesthetics of Generative AI.